In this video, we're going to specifically look at how to make a box plot. But I want to first just talk about the values that we need before we start drawing. And I want to remind you about the quartiles and percentiles. So we have our first quartile, Q1, and that's our 25th percentile for our data. The median is going to be the 50th percentile, and the third quartile is our 75th percentile. So we'll have 25% of the data between the minimum and Q1, 25% between Q1 and the median, 25% between the median and Q3, and then 25% between Q3 and the maximum. And this leads us to what's called the 5-number summary. And the 5-number summary is specifically those cutoff values, the minimum, Q1, the median, Q3, and the maximum. And we've already talked about how to find these in our calculator. And there's a previous video that shows that you would enter the data into L1, and then from L1 you're going to go to stat, calc, and then you're going to choose one variable stats or one var stats. And remember that in order to find that entire 5-number summary, you're going to have to scroll down in the output screen. And so the 5-number summary is right here between the minimum, Q1, median, Q3, and the max. Now, the other values that we need for a box plot is the IQR, and then we're going to calculate what are called fences. We use fences to calculate outliers. So a value that is below the lower fence would be considered a lower outlier, and a value that's above the upper fence is considered an upper outlier. So we already have the formula for the IQR here. Remember, that's the distance between Q3 and Q1. The lower fence is going to be Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR. The upper fence, notice that the operation is different. This is Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. I'm showing you these now. Let's actually do an example on the next page. So we're back to that same set of data, and I have the region of Northeast Midwest and the percent change here. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to put this percent change into L1 on your calculator. So you're going to go to Stat, Edit, and click on the edit, and then open that up. You'll see L1, and you're going to put all this data in. Once you've done that, you're going to go to Stat, Calc, and then you're going to choose one var stats. And we're going to pluck off the 5-number summary, which is specifically the minimum, Q1, the median, oops, I need more room here, the median, we have Q3, and the max. So when you put this in your calculator, you should get a minimum of negative 0.6. The Q1 is 2.95. The median is 4.9. Q3 came out to be 7.2, and the maximum is 14.6. So those are our 5 numbers that we need to start creating our box plot. To calculate the outliers, we need to know the IQR so that we can find the upper and lower fences. So the IQR, remember, is Q3 minus Q1. So in this case, it'll be 7.2 minus 2.95, which is 4.25. Then we want to find our fences. So the lower fence, which I'm going to abbreviate as LF here, the lower fence is going to be Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR. So this will be 2.95 minus 1.5 times 4.25. And you can put that all in your calculator exactly the way it is, and you should get negative 3.425. The upper fence will be Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. Q3 is 7.2 plus 1.5 times, again, the IQR is 4.25. When you do this calculation, we get 13.575. So now, in looking at the data, the lowest value here is negative 0.6. That is not lower than my lower fence, so it's not an outlier. But when I look at my upper values here, Virginia had a 13% population change, which is not above our upper fence. It was for StatCrunch, and that's why it showed 2 outliers, but it's not for ours. But Delaware is, this 14.6 right here. This is an outlier, and it's because it's above this upper fence of 13.575. So this is an outlier. So now we want to take all this information and we want to draw our box plot. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create an appropriate scale. So I have a vertical line down here. We're basically going up from just below 0 to 15. So I'm going to count by ones. Sometimes you want to count by 2s, 5s, 10s, depends on your data set. So I'm going to start at -1, and we're just going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And I'm just labeling some of them here. Okay, so we have our scale. Now we want to draw the box. And remember that the box is made up of Q1 and Q3. And I rewrote our information from the previous slide right here. So this is what we found on the previous slide. So Q1 is 2.95, so pretty close to 3. So here's Q1. Q3 is 7.2, so right about there. And we have our box. So again, this is Q1, which is 2.95, and this is Q3, which is 7.2. And then the median is 4.9, so right about there. So the median is 4.9. Now we want to make the whiskers for our box plot. This is actually, I should say this, our formal name for this box plot is a modified box and whisker plot. We call it a modified box plot because it shows outliers, and it's the box and whisker plot is the formal name. So we have the box, now we're going to make those whiskers. So the lower whisker is actually pretty easy to draw because there's no outliers. So we know that the minimum is at -0.6, so that's where the whisker is going to start. So we have a whisker here that starts at the data value of the minimum, which is -0.6. I'm not going to write minimum there because it's not always the minimum. If I have an outlier, that whisker is going to not be at the minimum. All right, so let's do now the upper whisker and the outlier. So I'm actually going to start with the outlier, even though that says step 8. Our outlier was that 14.6. So it is up right here. And I use an asterisk. Some people use a circle, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But somehow designate the outlier. Now the upper fence was at 13.575. So the upper fence is right about here. And I'm going to draw it in using a dot. So this is the upper fence, which was at 13.575. Our whisker for this box plot is going to end at the highest value that's below the fence, or basically the highest data value that's not an outlier. So that is going to be this value of 13. 13 is not an outlier. It's below the upper fence. So that's where our whisker is going to start, or end in this case, I guess. The biggest mistake that I see is that people have the whisker end at the upper fence. The upper fence is not a data value. It's just a way of differentiating where the outliers exist. We want the whisker to end at a specific data value. So this is ending at the data value 13. And I had to look at the table in order to find that. All right, so that's how you draw a modified box and whisker plot. I have one more example that I'm going to do. It's a very quick one on the next slide, but I'm going to make a separate video for that. You will be drawing a box plot for your written homework for this class.